The Carolingian Empire, one of the most important political entities in European history, traces its roots to the early Middle Ages, growing out of the ashes of the Western Roman Empire. Before the rise of the Carolingians, the region that would become France, Western Germany, and parts of Italy was fragmented, ruled by various Germanic tribes. Among these, the Franks emerged as a dominant power. The Franks were originally a loose confederation of Germanic tribes that had settled along the Rhine River. By the late 5th century, they began to consolidate under the leadership of Clovis I, the founder of the Merovingian dynasty. Clovis united much of Gaul through military conquest and strategic alliances. One of his most significant acts was converting to Christianity, specifically Catholicism, after his victory at the Battle of Tolbiac. This conversion earned him the support of the Roman Catholic Church and helped legitimize his rule over a mostly Romanized Christian population. Clovis' descendants, known as the Merovingian kings, ruled for nearly 2 centuries. However, over time they became increasingly ceremonial figures, often referred to by later historians as do-nothing kings. Real power gradually shifted to their chief administrators, known as the mayors of the palace. These men managed the kingdom's affairs, led military campaigns, and eventually overshadowed the Merovingian monarchs altogether. One of the most powerful mayors of the palace was Charles Martel, the grandfather of Charlemagne. Charles was born around 688 CE, the illegitimate son of Pepin of Herstal, a powerful mayor of the palace. Despite his illegitimacy, Charles proved himself an exceptional military leader and statesman. Following his father's death, a brief power struggle ensued, but Charles eventually emerged victorious, consolidating his authority as the de facto ruler of the Frankish realms. Charles Martel's most famous achievement was his victory at the Battle of Tours in 732 CE. In this battle, he led the Frankish army against invading Muslim forces from Al-Andalus, halting their northward advance into Europe. This battle has often been portrayed as a defining moment in European history, symbolizing the defense of Christendom against Islamic expansion. While modern historians debate the battle's long-term impact, its significance at the time cannot be overstated. It secured Charles Martel's reputation as the protector of the Christian West. Beyond his military exploits, Charles Martel laid the foundation for the Carolingian Empire by strengthening ties with the church and expanding Frankish influence. He confiscated land from the church to reward his loyal followers, a controversial move that angered some clergy but helped consolidate his power. He also reformed the Frankish army, encouraging the development of heavily armored cavalry units, a precursor to the medieval knightly class. Charles Martel never assumed the title of king, but his authority was uncontested. When he died in 741, he divided the kingdom between his 2 sons, Carloman and Pepin the Short. Carloman eventually retired to a monastery, leaving Pepin as the sole ruler. Pepin, unlike his father, sought to legitimize his rule by seeking the Pope's blessing. In 751, with the support of Pope Zachary, Pepin deposed the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, and was anointed king of the Franks, marking the beginning of the Carolingian dynasty. Pepin the Short's alliance with the papacy was a critical development in medieval European politics. In return for the Pope's support, Pepin promised to protect the papal territories from the Lombards, a Germanic tribe threatening Rome. True to his word, Pepin led 2 military campaigns into Italy and defeated the Lombards. He then donated the conquered lands to the Pope, a gift known as the Donation of Pepin, which laid the foundation for the Papal States. Under Pepin's rule, the Carolingian court became a center of learning and religious reform. Pepin promoted the standardization of liturgical practices and supported the missionary work of figures like Boniface, who sought to convert the Germanic tribes. These efforts helped to unify the Frankish kingdom under a common religious and cultural identity. When Pepin died in 768, he divided the kingdom between his two sons, Carloman and Charles. This division reflected the Frankish tradition of partible inheritance, which often led to internal conflict. Carloman and Charles ruled uneasily as co-kings for a few years until Carloman's sudden death in 771. Charles quickly moved to consolidate power, becoming the sole ruler of the Frankish kingdom. With Charles' ascension to the throne, the stage was set for the transformation of the Frankish kingdom into a vast empire. Over the next several decades, Charles, who would later be crowned as Emperor Charlemagne, would expand the Frankish realm to encompass much of Western and Central Europe. He would forge a powerful alliance with the Catholic Church, revive classical learning, and leave a legacy that would shape European civilization for centuries. Thus, the origins of the Carolingian Empire are rooted in a complex interplay of military prowess, religious legitimacy, and dynastic ambition. From Clovis' conversion to Christianity to Charles Martel as victory at Tours, and Pepin the Short as alliance with the papacy, each generation of Frankish leaders contributed to the rise of a new imperial order. The next phase of this history, Charlemagne's reign, would see the Carolingian Empire reach its zenith, becoming the dominant power in medieval Europe. The reign of Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, marks the golden age of the Carolingian Empire and stands as one of the most transformative periods in European history. His rule not only expanded the geographical boundaries of the Frankish kingdom, but also laid the foundations for what would become medieval Christendom. Under Charlemagne's leadership, the Carolingian Empire evolved into the dominant power in Western Europe, characterized by centralized administration, religious reform, cultural revival, and a dynamic partnership with the Roman Catholic Church. Charlemagne inherited the throne after the sudden death of his brother Carloman in 771, thereby becoming the sole ruler of the Frankish kingdom. He wasted no time in asserting his authority, beginning a series of military campaigns that would span most of his reign. Charlemagne's ambition was not only to expand his territory, but also to consolidate and Christianize it, thereby unifying his empire under both sword and cross. His most famous and longest military campaign was against the Saxons, a group of pagan Germanic tribes in the northeast of his realm. The Saxon Wars lasted over 30 years, from 772 to 804, and were marked by brutal tactics, forced conversions, and repeated rebellions. Charlemagne viewed the Saxon resistance as a threat not just to political stability, but to religious orthodoxy. After numerous battles, including the infamous massacre of Verdun in 782, where thousands of Saxon prisoners were executed, Charlemagne ultimately subdued the region and imposed Christianity through both missionaries and military governors. Simultaneously, Charlemagne waged campaigns against other regions, including Lombardy and northern Italy. In 773, he responded to a papal request for aid against the Lombards and led an expedition into Italy, defeating King Desiderius and taking the Lombard crown for himself. This victory not only expanded Charlemagne's influence into the Italian peninsula, but also solidified his relationship with the papacy. From then on, Charlemagne styled himself as the King of the Lombards and protector of the Church. Charlemagne's campaigns extended to the Spanish March, a buffer zone between Frankish lands and Muslim-controlled Al-Andalus, while he suffered a notable defeat at the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass in 778, an event immortalized in the epic poem, The Song of Roland. He eventually established control over northeastern Spain. Other notable military ventures included campaigns in Bavaria, Bohemia, and against the Avars in Central Europe, all of which expanded and secured the empire's borders. As the empire grew, Charlemagne faced the challenge of governing an increasingly diverse and vast territory. To address this, he implemented a sophisticated system of administration centered around the concept of local autonomy under imperial oversight. He appointed royal agents, or missi dominici, to travel throughout the empire, ensuring loyalty, collecting taxes, and overseeing justice. These officials, often paired as a nobleman and a bishop, reported directly to the emperor and helped maintain central authority. The Carolingian administration also depended heavily on a network of counts, dukes, and bishops who ruled local regions. Charlemagne granted land to these nobles in return for military service and loyalty, creating a semi-feudal system. However, he retained ultimate authority and regularly held assemblies, where laws were passed and royal policies discussed. In addition to political reform, Charlemagne undertook significant religious and cultural initiatives. A devout Christian, he saw himself as a defender and promoter of the faith. He reformed the Frankish church by standardizing liturgical practices, encouraging the use of the Roman rite, and strengthening ecclesiastical discipline. With the help of scholars like Alcuin of York, he initiated the Carolingian Renaissance, a revival of learning, arts, and classical knowledge. Charlemagne established palace schools and scriptoria in monasteries, where monks copied religious and classical texts. The Carolingian minuscule, a standardized script developed during this time, made texts more legible and preserved countless works from antiquity. His reign saw a flourishing of theological debate, legal scholarship, and architectural innovation, including the construction of the Palatine Chapel in Aachen, which became the Imperial capital. Charlemagne's relationship with the papacy reached its peak in the year 800. On Christmas Day, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne Emperor of the Romans during Mass at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. This coronation revived the Western Roman Empire in a Christian context and signaled the fusion of Roman, Germanic, and Christian traditions. It also marked the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire, though that specific term and political entity would only arise later. The coronation had profound implications. It asserted the Pope's authority to bestow imperial legitimacy, challenged the supremacy of the Byzantine Empire, and established Charlemagne as the protector of Western Christendom. While Charlemagne was reportedly surprised or even displeased by the coronation, possibly because it implied subordination to the Pope, he accepted the title and used it to reinforce his rule. By the early 9th century, Charlemagne had created a vast and stable empire stretching from the Pyrenees to the Elbe and from the North Sea to central Italy. Yet he remained deeply involved in the day-to-day affairs of governance, lawmaking, and religious affairs. His famous legal code, the Capitularies, covered everything from criminal law to the management of royal estates. Despite his achievements, Charlemagne was also aware of the fragility of his empire. In his later years, he took steps to ensure an orderly succession. He crowned his son, Louis the Pious, as co-emperor in 813, hoping to provide a smooth transition of power. When Charlemagne died the following year in 814, he was buried in the Palatine Chapel in Aachen, a city that had become the symbolic heart of the Carolingian Empire. Charlemagne's legacy was immense. He unified a large part of Europe under one ruler for the first time since the Roman Empire, revived classical learning, and shaped the identity of medieval Europe. His reign set the standard for kingship, law, and Christian governance for centuries to come. Though the empire would face challenges under his successors, the age of Charlemagne remains one of the most celebrated periods in European history. The death of Charlemagne in 814 marked the beginning of a new and challenging chapter for the Carolingian Empire. His only surviving legitimate son, Louis the Pious, inherited a vast and diverse realm that was held together largely by his father's strength of character and vision. Louis, a deeply religious man, would face the near impossible task of maintaining unity while also contending with familial rivalries, internal rebellions, and external threats. His reign would be pivotal in determining the fate of the Carolingian legacy. Louis the Pious had already gained experience as a ruler. He had been king of Aquitaine since 781, governing the region as a junior monarch under his father's guidance. Upon Charlemagne's death, Louis was crowned emperor in Aachen and immediately set about implementing reforms aimed at strengthening Christian morality, improving the conduct of the clergy, and asserting imperial authority. However, unlike Charlemagne, Louis lacked the political savvy and commanding presence to enforce unity across the sprawling empire. One of Louis' earliest actions was to purge his court of some of Charlemagne's most trusted advisors and install his own loyalists. This abrupt change in administration sowed discontent among the nobility. More controversially, Louis initiated a policy of penance and religious reform that, while rooted in genuine conviction, alienated many secular leaders who viewed his policies as overreaching and impractical. A major turning point in Louis' reign came in 817 when he issued the Ordinatio Imperii, a decree designed to regulate the succession and preserve imperial unity. According to this plan, Louis' eldest son, Lothair I, would be co-emperor and have overarching authority over the empire, while his younger sons, Pepin and Louis the German, would receive sub-kingdoms of Aquitaine and Bavaria, respectively. This decision, though well-intentioned, planted the seeds of future conflict. The situation became more complicated when Louis remarried after the death of his first wife. His second wife, Judith of Bavaria, bore him another son, Charles the Bald. Determined to secure a realm for Charles, Louis revised the Ordinatio Imperii to include this youngest son in the line of succession. This move outraged his older sons and sparked a series of civil wars that would ultimately fracture the empire. From 830 to 833, Louis faced multiple revolts from his sons, often supported by disaffected nobles and clergy. In a particularly humiliating episode, Louis was deposed in 833 by a coalition of his sons and forced to undergo public penance, a moment known as the Field of Lies. Although he was later restored to power, his credibility and authority had been irreparably damaged. The latter years of Louis' reign were marked by continual strife. Although he managed to retain the imperial title until his death in 840, he left behind an empire on the brink of disintegration. Upon his death, civil war broke out between his sons, Lothair, Charles the Bald, and Louis the German. The fraternal conflict culminated in the Battle of Fontenoy in 841, a bloody and inconclusive engagement that underscored the collapse of Carolingian unity. To restore peace, the brothers negotiated and signed the Treaty of Verdun in 843. This landmark agreement formally divided the Carolingian Empire into three distinct kingdoms. Lothair I received the central portion, known as Middle Francia, which included the imperial title and territories stretching from the North Sea through the Low Countries and along the Rhine, Burgundy, and northern Italy. Louis the German was granted East Francia, comprising much of modern-day Germany. Charles the Bald obtained West Francia, which would eventually evolve into the medieval Kingdom of France. The Treaty of Verdun is often seen as the beginning of modern European nation-states. It not only reflected the end of unified Carolingian rule, but also demonstrated the challenges of hereditary monarchy and partible inheritance. Although the treaty temporarily halted open warfare between the brothers, the division weakened the empire's ability to resist external invasions, particularly by the Vikings, Magyars, and Saracens. The fragmentation also diminished imperial authority. Each brother focused on consolidating power within his own realm, often at the expense of broader imperial cohesion. The dream of a unified Christian empire, so ardently pursued by Charlemagne, began to fade as local loyalties and regional identities grew stronger. Nonetheless, the Carolingian rulers of the mid-9th century continued to style themselves as emperors and sought legitimacy through ties to the Church and Roman heritage. Lothair maintained the imperial title and ruled from his capital in Aachen, but his authority was increasingly ceremonial. East and West Francia, meanwhile, laid the foundations for what would become Germany and France, respectively. The decline of central authority also gave rise to the growth of feudalism. With the weakening of royal control, local lords and nobles became the primary source of security and governance for the peasantry. This shift would characterize much of European political life in the centuries to come. In summary, the reign of Louis the Pious and the subsequent Treaty of Verdun marked the beginning of the end for the unified Carolingian Empire. What had been a vast and powerful realm under Charlemagne was now fragmented into rival kingdoms, each pursuing its own interests. The seeds of medieval Europe had been sown, but the Carolingian ideal of a single Christian empire under a divinely sanctioned ruler had become a memory of the past. Following the Treaty of Verdun in 843, which divided the Carolingian Empire among the three sons of Louis the Pious Lothair I, Charles the Bald, and Louis the German, the once unified empire began to unravel. What had been a relatively cohesive political and cultural entity under Charlemagne and Louis the Pious now fractured into separate kingdoms, each with its own ambitions, rivalries, and vulnerabilities. This fragmentation laid the groundwork for the disintegration of centralized Carolingian authority and marked the beginning of the empire's final decline. The rise of regional powers and persistent infighting, the Treaty of Verdun had created three primary realms: West Francia, East Francia, and Middle Francia. This division was inherently unstable, especially in Middle Francia, where Lothair I ruled. The geographical shape and lack of strong internal unity made it vulnerable to both internal dissent and external invasions. Furthermore, the tripartite division did not correspond neatly with linguistic, cultural, or political realities on the ground. Infighting among Carolingian rulers continued almost immediately. Each brother sought to extend his influence, often at the expense of the others. After Lothair I's death in 855, his realm was further divided among his sons, exacerbating the already growing fragmentation. Lotharingia, Burgundy, and Italy emerged as separate entities, each ruled by a different branch of the Carolingian family. These smaller territories were often weak and short-lived, frequently falling into the hands of more powerful neighbors or collapsing under internal pressure. Meanwhile, East and West Francia also saw continued tension between their rulers. Charles the Bald and Louis the German both sought control of Lothair's former lands, leading to intermittent warfare. Their successors continued this pattern of competition, frequently turning to warfare to resolve disputes rather than diplomacy. These internal conflicts severely weakened the Carolingians' ability to govern effectively and respond to external threats. The impact of Viking, Magyar, and Saracen invasions, one of the most pressing problems facing the fragmented Carolingian realms in the late 9th and early 10th centuries, was the wave of invasions by Vikings, Magyars, and Saracens. Each of these groups targeted the weakened Carolingian territories, taking advantage of their internal strife and lack of centralized defense. The Vikings, in particular, posed a severe threat to West Francia. Beginning in the 840s, Norse raiders repeatedly attacked settlements along the Seine, Loire, and other rivers, penetrating deep into the Carolingian heartland. They sacked major cities, including Paris, Rouen, and Nantes, and demanded massive ransoms to spare towns from destruction. In some cases, Viking bands settled permanently, as in the case of Normandy, which was granted to the Norse leader Rollo in 911 by Charles the Simple as a defensive measure. In East Francia, the Magyars emerged as the primary external threat. They conducted swift and brutal raids across the region in the late 9th and early 10th centuries, burning villages, plundering towns, and terrorizing the population. The Carolingians struggled to defend against these incursions due to their lack of coordination and depleted resources. It wasn't until the later efforts of local leaders like Otto I that the Magyars were decisively defeated. The Saracens, or Muslim raiders from North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula, also attacked parts of southern France and Italy. They established bases along the Mediterranean coast, launched naval raids, and even occupied parts of the Papal States. The inability of the Carolingians to repel these threats effectively highlighted the decay of their once powerful military apparatus. Decline of central authority and rise of feudalism. As the Carolingian rulers lost their grip on power, local lords and nobles began to fill the void. In the absence of strong kingship, these local leaders built private armies, constructed fortified castles, and exercised judicial and administrative authority within their domains. The result was the rise of feudalism, a decentralized political and social system based on personal loyalty, land grants, and hierarchical relationships. The Carolingians had inadvertently sown the seeds of this system by relying heavily on the support of regional aristocrats during times of crisis. In exchange for military service, they granted land and privileges to these nobles, who in turn owed allegiance to the king. However, as the monarchy weakened, these lords increasingly acted as independent rulers, only nominally recognizing the authority of the king. Feudalism provided some degree of local stability and protection, particularly against foreign invaders, but it further fragmented the realm and made centralized governance nearly impossible. Carolingian kings became figureheads, dependent on powerful vassals who could defy or manipulate them at will. The political landscape became one of competing barons, counts, dukes, and bishops, each with their own interests and agendas. The church, too, played a significant role in this transformation. Bishops and abbots, who often controlled vast tracts of land and wielded significant influence, became major political players. The papacy, which had once allied itself with the Carolingians, increasingly sought to assert its independence and spiritual authority, especially as imperial power waned. The end of the Carolingian line. The Carolingian dynasty persisted in name for a few more generations, but its effective power was minimal. In West Francia, the last Carolingian king, Louis V, died in 987 without an heir. This opened the door for the rise of the Capetian dynasty, beginning with Hugh Capet, who was elected king by the French nobility. The Capetians would go on to rule France for centuries, marking a clear end to Carolingian dominance. In East Francia, the Carolingian line lasted slightly longer, but by the early 10th century, power had already shifted to regional dukes and non-Carolingian rulers. The German kingship evolved into the Holy Roman Empire under the Saxon dynasty, beginning with Otto I in 962. Otto's coronation by the Pope echoed that of Charlemagne, but it marked a new chapter in European history, one in which the Carolingians were no longer central figures. In Italy, Carolingian influence had long since faded by the time of the 10th century. Various regional powers, including Lombards, Byzantines, and emerging Italian city-states, had taken control. The dream of a unified Christian empire in the West, as envisioned by Charlemagne, lay in ruins. Legacy of the Carolingian collapse. Despite its collapse, the Carolingian Empire left a profound legacy on European history. It had served as a model of Christian kingship, empire building, and cultural renewal. The Carolingian Renaissance, with its revival of learning, art, and classical knowledge, influenced subsequent generations and laid the intellectual groundwork for the High Middle Ages. Political fragmentation and feudal order that followed the Carolingian collapse would dominate Europe for centuries. Though decentralized, this new order created a framework in which kingdoms, duchies, principalities, and the church could coexist and evolve. The ideals of imperial authority and Christian unity would continue to inspire rulers such as Otto I, the Hohenstaufen emperors, and even later figures like Napoleon. Additionally, the Carolingian period had helped define the emerging identities of what would become modern European nations. The division of the empire into West and East Francia presaged the development of France and Germany, respectively. The struggles between monarchy and nobility, church and state, unity, and division, all played out in microcosm during the Carolingian decline, offering lessons and precedents for the medieval world. Conclusion: the final phase of the Carolingian Empire's history is a tale of disintegration, decentralization, and transformation. From a unified Christian empire under Charlemagne, the realm splintered into competing kingdoms, vulnerable to invasion, and ruled by increasingly autonomous local powers. Yet out of this chaos emerged the structures, institutions, and cultures that would define medieval Europe. The collapse of Carolingian authority was not merely an end, it was a beginning, the crucible from which the Europe of the Middle Ages was born. Despite its decline and eventual collapse, the Carolingian Empire left a profound and lasting legacy on European civilization. At the heart of this legacy was the Carolingian Renaissance, a revival of learning, culture, and administration spearheaded by Charlemagne and his court. This intellectual movement laid the foundation for the preservation and transmission of classical knowledge through monasteries, scriptoria, and ecclesiastical schools. The standardization of Latin script and texts helped stabilize the Church's liturgy and enhanced administrative coherence across the empire. One of the most enduring contributions of the Carolingians was their shaping of the relationship between church and state. The alliance between Charlemagne and the papacy, symbolized by his coronation as emperor by Pope Leo III in 800, established a precedent for divine kingship and the central role of the Church in legitimizing temporal authority. This partnership would influence the political theology of Europe for centuries to come, culminating in later debates over papal supremacy and imperial power. Administratively, the Carolingians pioneered forms of governance that emphasized loyalty, vassalage, and delegated authority. Their use of missi delnici royal envoys sent to oversee local jurisdictions offered a model of early centralized oversight that would inspire later medieval monarchies. Although the Carolingians could not prevent the fragmentation of their empire, they introduced institutional innovations that endured within the developing feudal system. Culturally, the empire's investment in scholarship, manuscript production, and theological discourse enriched the Christian tradition and cemented the Latin West's intellectual trajectory. The Carolingian minuscule, a clear and standardized script developed under Charlemagne, enabled efficient copying of texts and contributed to the preservation of ancient Roman and Christian literature. Militarily and politically, the Carolingians influenced the shape of Western European territories. The division of the empire in the Treaty of Verdun is often viewed as the precursor to modern European states such as France and Germany. While borders continued to fluctuate, the political consciousness of these regions was shaped by Carolingian precedent. Even centuries later, Holy Roman emperors would invoke Carolingian imagery and authority to legitimize their rule. By the late 9th and early 10th centuries, the Carolingian line began to fade, supplanted by emerging dynasties such as the Capetians in France and the Ottonians in Germany. Yet their name and memory endured, often romanticized by medieval chroniclers, and revived in subsequent centuries as models of pious kingship, effective governance, and Christian unity. In sum, the Carolingian Empire, though relatively brief in duration, had an outsized influence on the shaping of medieval Europe. Its intellectual, cultural, religious, and political legacies continue to be studied as foundational elements of Western civilization, bridging the worlds of antiquity and the Middle Ages in a uniquely transformative way.